Hi, I'm back again. I don't know how many of you were part of the first event, the first live event. I'm Lori Wolf. I'm out of the Helena office of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks at our Montana Wild Education Center. Glad you guys could join us today. And I'm here with two very special people who also work for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Mark Cloker is our Information Education Specialist out of Glasgow. And then I also have Scott Hemmer, who is our Wildlife Biologist out of the Havre office. And before we get started, I just want to kind of say a special thanks to a few organizations that made this possible, that we were able to have the funding to do this. And one of them would be the Ortenberg Claiborne Foundation, Weyerhaeuser, Cabela's, and Trans Canada. Thank you very much. Also want to give a special thanks to the school here, Cleveland School, because we are out at their school location, which is beautiful, by the way. I would have loved to have gone to school in a place like this. So we're glad they could join us for this session. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and Scott, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, yeah, nice to meet you again. My name is Mark Cloker. I work for Region 6, basically Northeast Montana. Not quite in Cut Bank, but I'm the Information Education Program Manager, and basically what my job is getting out information, whether through press releases or radio or Facebook even. Yeah, I get to do Facebook and get paid for it. And I also get to do a lot of educational type events, and I got a little background in biology as well, but I'm nowhere near as much of an expert as this guy here on all things biology, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Scott Hemmer. I'm a wildlife biologist with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Kind of reverse of Mark. I spend time with wildlife, but I don't do as many educational events. I'm rarely on TV. As a biologist, I just get to spend most of my time away from people out in the field. Although a lot of it is work with landowners. Manage a lot of different species. We do a lot of with deer, elk, antelope, and sage grouse is a big part of that. I'm definitely not a sage grouse expert, but it's something that we spend a lot of time on. Compared to some other bird species, and at least know a little bit about, so hopefully we can answer a few of your questions today. Anyone, and I can't answer, we'll probably try to get that information and get it back to you.
So as you can see, we're here by Cleveland School, where we got a nice expanse of prairie, kind of reminiscent of your project of your big grouse area that you're, I guess, tasked to figure out a way to manage. We got a couple sage grouse behind us, a male and a female. We have them trained really well, so they're just going to chill out there and look pretty for you. But it's a pretty neat area. And how many in here, raise your hand if you've ever seen a live sage grouse? All right, well, we got Cleveland that said they've seen sage grouse. How about Cut Bank? I couldn't see. Is that one hand? Okay, well, good. So, well, they're not like a robin or a backyard bird, right? They're something that you can see in a lot of different habitats. They're obviously found where their name implies, near sagebrush, which we don't really have in town, and we're actually, losing from historic amounts across the country. So, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we're obviously the state agency that is in charge of managing wild species in the state, so that's one species that we do focus on. Like Scott said, he does a lot of other species as well, but that's one that we're going to obviously focus on today and talk a little bit about how we as an agency help manage sage grouse for the state of Montana.
I guess some of this review from maybe your earlier ones, but so one of the reasons we do spend a lot more time on sage grouse than probably any other bird, it's probably over 400 species of birds in Montana. I don't think there's any other bird we spend near the amount of time on as sage grouse. A large part of that's because what their numbers have been doing. Historic across the range, numbers are estimated down probably 90%. I don't think they have a good idea what numbers were in the past. A lot of estimates you hear are anywhere from 2 million to 16 million birds. Currently, a lot of estimates you'll see is anywhere from 200 to 600,000 birds left in North America for sage grouse. So they've had over a 90% decline. The main reason for that has been that our sagebrush has been declining. We're probably 45% of what we historically had for sagebrush. A lot of that's been broken up or fragmented, and that's caused a resulting drop in those sage grouse populations. So that's something we're trying to watch very carefully, see what we can. It's much easier to do something now before the birds get too far down. Cover them now before they get really low. Trying to bring them back is tough. So protect that habitat now. It's much better to be proactive on that. So that's one reason we spend a lot of time. I think the federal government's put a lot of resources in it in the last 10 years. They spent over $1 billion on sage grouse conservation programs. Really a lot of focus on this bird. I think I do get questions from some people, why do you put that much focus on the bird? Just because and I think you talked about earlier, one advantage of it is it's an umbrella species. It covers a lot of other species by protecting it.
Yeah, if we're protecting sage grouse, we're really protecting their habitat, which is obviously important for a lot of other species as well. And from what you guys have learned about sage grouse in this project, raise your right hand if in Montana sage grouse are endangered. How about raise your left hand if they're a threatened species? How about raise both hands if they're a species of concern? Yeah, all right, I like it. So yeah, field goal. Now, they are a species of concern, okay? And so just I think you guys have looked that up, but basically if they're a species of concern, they're kind of endangered of being threatened, and if they're threatened, they're endangered of being endangered, and if they're endangered of being extinct. Okay, so they're kind of at that tipping point where we don't want them to be threatened. We don't want them to be endangered. We want to keep them, at healthy populations where we have a viable population to enjoy, and not get to that point. Because a lot of times when a species reaches that point of threatened or endangered, there's a lot of times a lot more restrictions of things that can be done perhaps in their habitat, and we don't want that to affect the good working relationships we have with landowners who provide a lot of the habitat just by their ranching practices that we currently have for sage grouse. Anything to add to that, Scott?
Yeah, I basically just say that, kind of we said before, it's easy to do something early. Things like with that Endangered Species Act, I think passed in 1973. Since then we've only had a few species really go extinct in the United States, but worldwide since 1900 we've probably had over 500 species go extinct, which can be a natural phenomenon. Species go extinct, although it's been happening at an increasing rate. Always worried about, like he said, once it becomes listed on that endangered or threatened species list, it's actually managed by a different agency, by the federal government. We are less involved at that point. So if we can do something to keep it from getting on that list, it gives us more flexibility in what we're going to do to try to manage them before it gets to that point. So it's kind of the ounce of prevention's worth a whole lot of cures. So
yeah, especially when it's sagebrush. So as far as our agency helping manage these sage grouse to keep them at that good level that we really do have in the state, and a huge proponent of that is just that we have a lot of good habitat for sage grouse. Like Scott said, sagebrush has been eliminated by over 50% across most of the U.S., but luckily in Montana, a lot of our good sagebrush habitat is either on private land where folks have run large ranching operations for a long time, and we also have a lot of public land where there's good sagebrush habitat, which has allowed that to stay pretty intact. But that's one of our number one things for managing and helping manage sage grouse and sagebrush, for that matter, is working with landowners to maintain that habitat across their core areas. And I know Scott's been involved with a few things. For instance, one of the incentive programs we have are conservation easements, and I'll let Scott talk about that.
Yeah, so as Mark is saying, a lot of the ground and public ground like BLM has a lot of the sage grouse, but there's quite a bit of private land out here as well. And a lot of the landowners we deal with, they like sage grouse, they enjoy seeing them, but their primary concern has to be making their ranch profitable, or at least be able to break even. And that's something that at times that requires potentially breaking up the sagebrush to plant into a crop that makes a little more money, or doing something else with it. They're interested in helping sage grouse if there's a way that we can help them make fiscal financial sense. And through easements is one way to do that. You basically pay that landowner a certain amount of money to basically say that, yes, I'm going to keep my sagebrush intact for maybe the next 30 years, or some are forever. Just basically saying that, yeah, we'll be willing to do that. We can continue to graze our livestock the way we want to, do that, but we won't plow, we won't burn that sagebrush to get rid of it. And that gives them the money to be able to say, well, I can afford to do that now. So that's one of the big programs we've had. Not just us, other agencies do that as well. We also do some kind of habitat restoration, some areas that may have been plowed up, maybe planted as something like crested wheatgrass, which is the grass that sometimes livestock can use early, but in general it grows well, but it's kind of weedy, it's hard to get rid of. Look at trying to see those areas back to more of a native grass. One thing it is tough to do with sagebrush, especially like big sage, it's very hard to get that to grow again. You can do it, but it takes a lot of work once it's been either burned or plowed or somehow sprayed out. So if you can get that protected before it's gone, sage grouse will use it much more. Once it's gone, it's never quite the same, it seems like, and it really, like I said, you can raise seedlings and plant them, but it's 20 times the work to replant it as it is to protect it.
Great. Shall we stop for some questions? Oh, you got a sage.
Well, this is silver sage. This is one that sage grouse will use it to a smaller degree, but big sage is kind of their more primary species. I mean, I just killed this one, I guess, but silver sage is a lot more, I guess, prevalent, and almost it grows back easier. In fact, this field behind us has some alfalfa, some brome, some crested, and some silver sage that's growing up in it that just probably recolonized. So it's a little hardier version of sagebrush, but like Scott said, big sage is one that we want to protect a lot more because it is more difficult to reestablish.
Okay.
It's also probably used more. I mean, big sage, you get expanses where you have, 50 square miles of big sagebrush, where silver sage usually is a little more patchy, and just probably not quite as good a sage grouse habitat.
Okay. Let's go ahead to Cut Bank for 1 or 2 questions. Let's do 2 questions. And then I think we've got Stevensville type. Go to Cleveland for some questions. So let's start with Cut Bank. Cut Bank, do you have a question or 2? Don't be shy.
About the sage.
You have to talk really loud.
No?
No?
Just ask it. We have one.
Oh, good. Go.
How do you conserve the sage grouse on private land? I know you work with the owners, but
Are there any other steps?
Yeah.
Or...
Any other steps to conserve sage habitat on private land? That's a good question.
Yeah, like I said, the easements is a big one. We talked a little bit about some things we do to restore it, but we also do things as far as sometimes helping implement what we call grazing systems. Basically put in new fencing or water lines so that they can get a better use of the pastures. Grazing and sage grouse are very compatible, but there's ways you can graze it, get better use where you're not hitting one area too hard, especially if it's maybe near a lek. There has been some things where we've worked with private landowners. If there's a fence right near a lek, you can put little markers on that fence to try to keep the sage grouse. Sometimes in the early morning when they're flying in, it's dark, they don't see that fence and they'll run right into it. So that's another thing. We've done in the past, there's some things where you can get birds drowned in water tanks. You can provide ramps where basically those birds can climb out if they get in. Those are kind of smaller things, but the main thing we do is looking at ways to try to keep that sagebrush out there. Like I said, that's a lot of the habitat mark with sand that we still have is because it's been in long-term ranching operations. It's kept that sagebrush out there. We look at trying to ways that it can make sense for them to keep that sagebrush there, but still keep them on that landscape so that it doesn't end up, being subdivided maybe for housing or plowed up for farming.
Great. Stevensville wants to know, how long does it take to grow sagebrush from seed?
Like I said, you can grow it from seed fairly. You almost have to. It's hard to plant it and get it to grow. You can grow it, probably plant a seed in 2 or 3 years. But for it to get a lot of the sagebrush, the silver sage grows a lot faster. But you see a Wyoming big sagebrush that's knee height out there, and that plant is probably 40, 50 years old.
Wow.
They don't come back. Like I said, areas where they've had big stand replacing fires that wipe out the sagebrush. A lot of times it's 100 years till you get sagebrush back like it was.
Wow. Do we have some questions from our live guests?
Okay.
What happens do you go to jail if you plow up the sagebrush without asking?
No, not on private land. It's your land. They can do what they want with it. Sagebrush isn't protected in any way. Like I said, on the BLM or something, you'd have to ask them first because that's, they manage that property. But no, it's something that we try to encourage people to do it through incentives. But if they need to plant it, to weed or something to make profit, they can do what they want.
Have you plowed up some sage grouse or sagebrush before?
He's worried.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, and you might want to repeat the questions too, just in case they couldn't hear
The
it.
question was if it was illegal or if you'd go to jail if you plowed up sagebrush. And like Scott said, on private land, you can do what you want. Yes, there in the back.
Which purpose related to Austria?
question is, are sage grouse related to ostriches? Well, everything's related at some point, but I think there's a pretty big expanse there in the family tree of birds between ostriches and sage grouse. They kind of look like them though, don't they? They're big, tall bird. We have what is it? Species of grouse in the state? 6. So out in the prairie here, we have sharp-tailed grouse, and that's more than likely what you guys have seen dancing out here. And then we have sage grouse. You guys might have ruffed grouse up in the hills.
Blue grouse.
Blue grouse, okay. So anyway, there's a lot of species that are more related to sage grouse around here, but ostriches, that's a distant cousin, I think. Yes.
Kind of funny, though. You ever see the ostrich kind of displaying and flap its wings? Kind of some similar behaviors that you can see why you think in there. Like I said, the coloration's kind of similar, but
yeah,
I think they're pretty distant cousins.
Yeah. On the pink.
Do you know how exactly?
How what?
How they got endangered?
Oh.
So her question was if we want to know how exactly they got endangered. And I don't know if I could say we know exactly. You know, there's a lot of factors that probably come to play. Like I said, the fact that they're so tied to sagebrush and that the sagebrush number has really declined, I think that's a major factor. But you know, there's a lot of other things that come into it, whether it's predators, whether it's disease. There's a lot of things that I don't think I could give you one reason or say I know exactly why. And actually, they're not endangered yet. They're doing pretty well in Montana. There's something we're concerned about, but they aren't endangered yet.
Okay, I'm going to flash you a question from Stevensville. The most popular question we've heard so far today: how long do they live?
Yeah, and like I said, I think I said to one of the early classes that most of them probably don't actually live past a year. Most of them are probably dying. That's where we lose most of them. But if they do get to about a year old, most of them will probably live 3 to 6 years. Is kind of getting the average age of a sage grouse. For a bird, they're actually a little bit longer lived than most other upland birds, and some will even maybe make it to 10 years. But that's probably about the max.
Okay, let's go ahead and you guys continue, and then we'll come back for some more questions.
So one of the things we do, as we said, for management is obviously work with habitat, and that's a big part of it. But another thing we do, we just want to know how those sage grouse are doing. And so Scott's going to talk about that a little bit, about how we monitor their numbers.
You might have, some of this might review from earlier classes, but the way we usually count sage grouse is we go to what are called leks, or dancing grounds. Those are areas that the birds congregate this time of year in the spring when they're breeding. The males get out there and start doing their dance. They're hopping around and, you know, acting weird, but that's an easy place for us to count them. Sage grouse, if you've ever run into them, the few people that have seen them in the sagebrush, they're really hard to see. Sometimes you might walk right up to one and before it flushes out next to you and it scares you.
Yeah.
Several times I've just about fallen over when they've jumped up next to me, and it's kind of embarrassing if someone else jumps up and you let out a kind of a early scream and like act like you're about to get, you know.
Because they're big. They're a real big
bird.
bird, and they make a lot of noise when they take off. And
the thing is, though, they don't take off very fast. They're pretty slow takeoff, but yeah. So we go out and count those leks. The one thing with they call it lek fidelity. They come back to that same lek. Like Mark said, we've been checking some since the 50s. They seem to come back to that same lek. There can be some change, some leks pop up, but a lot of times that same lek, every year you'll see birds there, and so we can kind of count those males. We'll count the females, but we don't use that as much. Just you'll hear for population trends, male leks, because the females are hard to see. They don't get out and display. They kind of move in and out, hang around the edges. That's something we do this time of year. Usually starting. This year is later with all the snow, but usually out mid-March we'll be out counting leks all the way through. Probably the first week of May here is about when we stop. So that's kind of how we kind of monitor that population. That allows us to get an idea: are we up or down? And
okay.
So talk about that a little bit.
So we do hunts or have a season for sage grouse as far as for hunting.
Okay, hang on just a second. Cut bank.
Figure out back.
Hey, Cat Bank, can you mute your microphone, please?
We still might need to plug that into something.
Oh, I am.
Cat Bank, can you mute your microphone? That would be lovely. Thank you. Thank you. I'm still hearing them.
Sorry.
Hang on. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, so another way we help manage sage grouse is actually a lot of people really question that. They're like, hey, this bird is like, a species of concern. How can we have a hunting season on him? But it's pretty conservative. It's only really in the eastern half of the state where sage grouse are more plentiful, and you can harvest up to 2 a day and have up to 4 in possession, like in your freezer. But it's not, there isn't the sage grouse season like west of the Divide in western Montana. But really, like Scott will say, it's a very marginal impact on the number of sage grouse that are out there. Part of that's because a lot of times, for really any upland bird, it's a lot of times the young of the year that are harvested, and a lot of those won't make it through the year anyway. But
Yeah, just in general, large populations, most of the research they've done suggests if you're harvesting below 10% of the population, you're not having an impact. A lot of the studies in Montana where they've had females collared have found less than 1% of the birds been harvested. We probably only take, on average, maybe 3,000 birds a year. Pretty small numbers, and it also, having that hunting, one, provides funding. Some people are buying a hunting license that we use for management. One, keeps people interested in sage grouse management. When people can see them, go out and hunt them, and a lot of those people are very motivated and connected to that bird. Those are the people that a lot of times fight most for sage grouse conservation long term. And I think additionally, we do get some information too. Sometimes from the wings, people turn in. We can get ideas of ages, how the production was that year. Get biological information from them that way.
And the season has been adjusted at times when our numbers have been pretty low. One thing, it's a shortened season. It's not the same as like a sharp-tailed grouse, which is September 1st to January 1st. It just goes from September 1st to October.
End of September.
End of September. So just a month long. And also, a few years ago, it was limited to a smaller area of the state where it was able to be hunted. So.
Great. We've got a couple questions coming in from Stevensville.
All right.
They want to know, who are the predators, how far and high can they fly, and what's the scientific name? Aha!
Okay, predators, there's a variety. I think for adult birds, you're going to have eagles, hawks, coyotes, foxes are probably some of the common ones. For the nests and the young, you're going to have badgers, even ground squirrels, snakes, crows, ravens, just a lot of animals, skunks, just a lot of species that predate on the nests or the young, and then even some of those other ones I mentioned before. Take young ones as well. So a lot of predators.
On the flight thing, like Scott said, they're a pretty slow flyer, and in some ways, maybe that makes them a little bit more prone to predation. They can't flush as quickly as some birds. So maybe, whether that's a ground predator like a coyote or a fox that gets a tasty meal. They are a big bird, as you guys can see, so they would provide pretty good sustenance. So I'm sure predators kind of key in on them. As far as how high they fly, I've never seen them fly probably higher than about the top of a telephone pole. They're not like a waterfowl that's up there at 30,000 feet. But for as big of a bird as they are, and as heavy as a bird as they are, they actually, once they get up and going, they can fly pretty well. And you guys have probably heard in some of your, or read in some of your research, we have a pretty good population of grouse, particularly in northern Montana, that actually migrates. Particularly during the winter, they move south, and so they're moving long distances and flying, up to 100 plus miles, I think, in some cases. That so they are a pretty decent flyer. Scientific name, I will stumble on that.
I'll mess it up probably too, but Citricarus phasianus.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Woo!
Yeah.
Good job.
I can give you the Wolverine. But,
yeah, I can too.
So good questions.
Good questions. Did we have another?
We didn't get your question yet. What's your question?
How come they dance?
Oh,
That's a good question. Your question was how come they dance?
Well, it's kind of like people. I don't know if you guys have had a Cleveland dance yet. That'd be kind of small, but so it is honestly kind of like a dance floor with people, where people get out there and they do their little dance, whatever. And it's particularly the males that are trying to attract the females, right? And so these males are all kind of competing against each other to who has, maybe the best display when they're puffing out their chest with all those beautiful colors, or perhaps some of the wet blurp, as I call it, the sound that they make. And it's just the females that actually pick the males. The males don't say, "Oh, I'm going to take that female." It's the other way around. The females actually go around until they find that male that traditionally is pretty dominant in that lek. You might have 50 birds out there, 50 males out there, but there might be one male doing 95% of the breeding. It's kind of a neat deal, but the females choose that male that they basically think is going to give them, their offspring, the best genes. So that's basically it, Scott.
Yeah, not much yet. Mark hit it really well. I think there's, like he said, that even there's a lot of birds display, it's a small percentage that are probably doing most of the breeding. And a lot of times, kind of in the center of the lek, there's a lot of it has to do with the area you're in. You don't often see them fighting. Occasionally you will, but a lot of it's, this is my space. If another bird comes into there, he'll chase him off. That's the spot he wants to be in. And it's like I said, it's all about trying to impress the girls.
Yep.
Kind of like people. Stevensville wants to know, how long does the breeding process take?
But I would highly suggest I have a Fish, Wildlife, and Parks web or Facebook page, Region 6. You just put FWP Region 6 into Facebook. And I uploaded a video yesterday that our biologist out of Malta put up there called the cloacal kiss. And basically when the female presents herself to the male, does the thing, but it takes 2 seconds. Basically, it's very fast. I'm not sure if you're getting that graphic or if you want to know the breeding season. But either way, you can watch the video. It's pretty cool. There's 2 videos, actually. One that actually is showing a dominant male that has, I think, 12 females around him. So he's like the big dog on camera. And then the other one is this short breeding.
I think we just woke up the middle schoolers.
Okay, hey, all right.
Yay! Yeah, so middle school and cut bank. No more breeding questions, but what question do you have?
What? Ask.
How long do they stay together? Like,
As a flock or?
to breed, how long do they stay together?
Seconds.
No, like.
Like, are they like geese? Okay, yeah. Just,
Yeah.
do they,
Yeah, they're not like geese where they like mate for life or there's any real mating. Like I said, one male's probably doing a lot of the breeding. That female, once she breeds, is going to go off, and the male doesn't help out at all. Maybe that's like humans as well. I don't know, but the male doesn't help with raising the eggs. The female goes off, lays the eggs, raises the chicks on her own.
so there's no shared responsibility.
Not really, not.
Yeah.
In fact, on the sage grouse,
That's a good question.
you guys maybe saw, or maybe watched it. I don't know. It's a great program. If you haven't seen it, they talk about they observe one male mating 38 females in 38 minutes. So, yeah, not a whole lot of time to raise all those babies.
Yeah.
We had a question in Cleveland here. Yeah. Great question. So the question was on BLM, Bureau of Land Management property, do you have to have a license to hunt sage grouse? Yes, you have to have a license to hunt sage grouse anywhere, even on private land. It's an upland bird license, which I believe is $650. That's right. Yep. And so as long as you got permission to hunt, whether that's on maybe your private property or if it's public land and you have access to that public land like BLM, you can hunt sage grouse there. So it's a good question.
Great. What other topics do you want to cover with these guys?
Yeah, research.
Yes, another thing, we talked about how hunting, we can learn some information about sage grouse that way. Another thing we're looking to do is always learn more about what sage grouse need. Kind of provides us information on how better to conserve them. One way to do that, I think Mark told one I have one here too. I'd love to show it to you. It's the use of radio collars, and this is a kind of a neck band radio collar. Been a lot of advances in radio collars since I started working in the last 20 years for sure. Making these small enough where they can fit on a sage grouse. Used to be radio collars were very large. You can only put them on animals like elk, deer. Couldn't put them on a sage grouse because it was too large. You basically wouldn't be able to fly, or if it could even fly, you'd probably get picked off by a predator. They've gotten a lot smaller. Even nowadays, they have ones that to basically send the information. Assuming these ones are the same way, a lot of these you had to go out to find them. You'd listen. You have basically an antenna, kind of walk around, look silly, listening for them. Kind of beep, 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 beep. You find them and you go out, look for them, and see where they're at, or you can even do it from the air flying. Now they have ones that basically will upload where they're at to a satellite, and then broadcast it back down. You can sit on your computer and be like, oh, there he was yesterday, and you can follow where he's going. But that provides us a lot of information. You know, what habitats are they using? A lot of times, like I said, we know where a lot of the leks are at, but a lot of times we don't always know what. I think you guys talked to maybe a little bit earlier about some of the different seasonal changes, but some of the late brooding habitat or the winter habitat, we don't always know what they need there. That there may be habitats that are important to them that we're missing. So that helps us find that information out. In addition to that, a lot of these colors, once the animal, if it doesn't move long enough, basically if it's dead, they'll tell us that they're dead. You can go out and hopefully if you get there soon enough, you figure out maybe why they died. Was it disease? Was it predation? Was it starvation? What was the cause? So definitely we're looking at research for that. Impacts of hunting is another thing we've looked at for some of these studies. Impacts of grazing, as there are ways that we can, like I said, we talked a little bit earlier about how we set up grazing systems, but looking at what's the best way to maybe graze an area that still allow it to provide food for cattle, but also then maybe provide some habitat for sage grouse as well. So, like I said, radar collars have really changed how wildlife is done. Another 10 years I might be saying about drones or something else, but technology definitely has changed how we do our jobs.
Very cool. We are having a question about why is a lek called a lek?
Boy, I guess I'm not really sure the name definition by named it.
Yeah, I've heard it before. I'm trying to remember. Like lek was a term that meant like a group or something. That it wasn't a biological term to start with, but I can't remember the exact reason why it came up with lek. There was a reason they think that they called it that. I don't remember why.
Okay, Stevensville, do the research. You can get back to us on that.
And just to throw that out there, so like it's kind of a grouse, you know, as a family, that's a pretty common thing. Sage grouse obviously have a lek. Sharp-tailed grouse do a similar type dancing deal. Like rough grouse, drum, a wink beat. We also call that as a lek. I think there's some other grouse species. So it's kind of unique to the grouse family to a degree.
Yeah, it's definitely a term that most people have used that term. You've never been around sage grouse or grouse before. They look at you like, what are you talking about? It's, you know, a lot of times if we're talking to classes of people that haven't done the research like you guys have done, call them a dancing ground. Otherwise it's
Maybe that could be a prom theme in Cut Bank.
Yeah, the lek. Come to the Cut Bank lek. Okay, do we have another question in Cut Bank?
Yes. How many eggs do they lay, and how long does it take for them to hatch?
Okay. Generally, can vary, but probably 7 to 9 eggs is typical. How long to hatch is usually about 28 days from when they're laid, give or take a few days, but that's about how long. So a lot of these ones are breeding, like I said, mid-April, so a lot of these eggs will probably be hatching by the time they month to lay, another month, probably mid-June, late May is when we get a lot of these ones hatching.
And really, that's kind of one of the key things is we hope to have good hatch survival. Typically, there's pretty good hatch success within the nest, but it really depends on what Mother Nature brings for the spring as far as temperatures and moisture. And the young sage grouse chicks, the little ones, are really dependent upon a lot of insect and young shoots from forbs and grasses. So if we don't get a nice moist spring where we don't have a lot of insects or forage growth, that can be pretty detrimental to those survival of those chicks.
About how big are the eggs?
Pretty similar to
I'd say
A little smaller than a
chicken egg.
Yeah.
Closer to maybe a farm raised chicken.
Okay. They're really, really interested to understand that whooping sound and how that's made and why and all of that.
Yeah, like I said, that whooping sound, they have 2 large ear sacs in their chest there that they're basically inflating. And you see them display, they kind of puff up their chest and they kind of collapse it. Collapse those air sacs, make kind of that thumping, whooping noise. It kind of almost sounds like kind of a ping ball type thing. And like I said, a lot of that's the reason they're doing it again is they can attract the females. That's one way the earlier class we're talking that we can find new leks as we go out on a day. And if there's enough birds displaying there, you can hear that over a mile away. They're out there displaying. That's part of the sounds, part of that display, trying to track those females. It's saying, "Here we are. Come take a look."
Wow, they're amazing. Talk to us a little bit about eating sagebrush. I know in the last class that we did, you showed some scat.
Yeah, so obviously you guys know that sage grouse is a type of sagebrush, and part of the reason is not only for nesting cover and habitat shelter, but it's also they live on it almost exclusively during the winter. So Scott's gonna show us some leftover sagebrush here in a second.
Like you said, in the winter they eat pretty much 100% sagebrush. One of the neat things I think about sage grouse, or related to sagebrush, is your animals don't eat that much of it. It's because sagebrush has a lot of chemicals in it. That's how sagebrush protects itself. They have what called like terpenes or terpenoids. Basically, it's the same stuff as in turpentine. And they are able to basically digest that, which most animals can't. And it's just, they can eat a little bit of it, but 100% is just too much. You go out normally in winter, we call these kind of Cheetos. I don't know if they'll be able to see that. Get there close enough, but small little droppings. These are in winter pretty much 100% sagebrush, but in addition to that, you get something that looks like this a lot of times. Kind of hard to see when it's not in the light, but it's kind of black and almost looks like tar. And that's their digestive system. They're basically able to, in the basically cecal area, it's part of the intestine, they can separate that out from the sagebrush, and then they basically excrete that out, poop it out as well, but separately. That's kind of one of their neat adaptations, that because sagebrush really is a very nutritious plant in winter. It's probably has more protein and energy than a lot of other stuff out that you can get to in the winter. But just because of those chemicals, where sagebrush are able to have adapted with sagebrush where they can rely on that all winter long. And that's, other animals will only eat it maybe when winter gets hard and they can't find anything else, where they target sagebrush. So that's one of the neat things about it.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting really close to.
Well, we have one more.
One more question.
This is an interesting one.
Yeah.
How does a girl sage grouse know which dance is the one?
Okay, let's repeat that so they can for sure hear it.
So
Go ahead.
the question is, how does a female sage grouse know which male is the one? I'd say there's a couple reasons. But basically, it's probably that, like Scott said, there's that kind of the prime real estate in the lek somewhere, and that's probably a similar spot year after year, and probably a different male there. But one, they'll see that male is fighting off all these other males, and sometimes that all it takes is just a little stare or puff of the chest, and they'll go running. So as I understand it, can sense that dominance of that particular male, but he might also just be just a handsome fella that can sing really well. And you'll see if Facebook from yesterday, like I said, there's two, but the first one, there's all these females around this one guy, and the biologist had filmed this guy quite a bit, and he was fighting off all these other males, so they could see that for sure. So Scott, anything to add there?
Similar, like you said, I think the location is pretty important, but just the displaying in general and what they do, similar to other animals. Why elk have giant, antlers, or other animals have these things that really don't make any sense evolutionarily. They put a lot of energy into it. Similar to sage grouse, displaying out every morning, they're making themselves very vulnerable to predators. Animals that are able to do that every morning and still survive are usually the fittest. It's definitely some selection against them for doing that. So if they're able to sit out there and not get taken by a hawk or a predator, it suggests that they're maybe a little tougher than everyone else, and they're the ones that.
Do they actually fight each other?
Oh yeah.
Like.
They'll. I haven't put any videos this year, but I have in the past. Just look it up on YouTube or something. But yeah, they draw blood and then beat each other with their wings. Usually not to mortality. I think that'd be pretty rare.
Yeah, a lot of times you won't see them fighting very often just because it's already been established that at some point during the year they fought, and this one whooped the other guy and he's learned his lesson. And it may happen again, especially if he intrudes in his space, but most mornings you may only see one or two little fights. And like I said, I've never heard one to the death, but it could happen, I guess.
Okay. Well, let's see what... It's 10 o'clock.
Yeah, let's see how the thing has...
Cut Bank, do you have any final questions? I'm wondering are they still there? Oh yeah, I see them. Cut Bank, do you have any other questions to wrap up?
Unmute your thing.
You have to unmute your microphone. Oh, sorry, we muted you.
There we go. Now they can talk.
Go ahead, Cut Bank.
Did you guys?
Oh. Teasing you. Sorry.
What?
Go ahead, Cut Bank.
Okay, one more time, Jacob. What kind of diseases bring down the population?
Ooh, good question, Jacob.
The biggest concern for sage grouse and sage grouse for disease is West Nile virus. Most humans, horses get that too, but that's something that definitely sage grouse are susceptible to. They don't seem to. A lot of ones get it, do die. It hasn't. Good thing about it is it seems like West Nile pops up and kind of goes away for a few years. You need kind of the right weather and environmental conditions for West Nile to be bad. But that's definitely one that we're watching in sage grouse and there's concern about, because it definitely, in some areas, we can see we do our counts the next fall. When you see I guess when fall comes and we have a lot of cases in humans, there a lot of like mosquitoes showing West Nile. A lot of times next spring our bird counts in some areas maybe down 20-30%. It's definitely has an impact. That's an important disease for sage grouse.
And it is a tough one because they don't know how to use the spray cans and deep woods off very well. So Scott had talked about, I think with the last class, about how there's a few ways we're trying to mitigate a little bit of that.
In some areas they've looked at, or if there's regulating water, dam control, at the right time you're releasing water out of these dams to kind of flush it out. It's moving water the larvae don't like. If there's bigger ponds, you can build them one so they don't have shallow water where they maybe have steeper sides. If it's a natural one, they've even gone into some areas and put larvicide, basically poison that kills the larvae from mosquitoes. It's hard to do that on a large scale, so it's kind of a case by case basis. It's definitely one that I haven't seen anything yet about any vaccines or anything like that we're doing for sage grouse, which I don't know how you'd vaccinate a lot of sage grouse anyways, but it's one I think we'll probably just continue to try to live with. Like I said, it seems like they bounce back really well after West Nile goes away. As long as we can kind of keep good numbers, good habitat out there, I think they'll weather that storm.
Okay, do you guys have any final questions? Cleveland, from Cleveland.
Yeah, you got one?
What do the babies eat?
Ooh.
The question was, what do the babies eat? Well, they're considered a precocial bird, right?
That helped.
Yeah, so basically, which means that they're not like a robin, that sits there in the nest, and is waiting for mom to bring it food. Basically, as soon as they pop out of the egg, just like a chicken, they're basically ready to go, a little fuzzball that's running around. So they're going to focus as best as they can on insects like grasshoppers or maybe beetles that are crawling around the sagebrush, and then also, like I said, some fresh, tender shoots of green things, I guess, particularly early on. And then anything else that you're aware of, Scott?
No, that's pretty much, like I said, start out, like those insects have a lot of protein. Like I said, that we call forbs, like I said, the little green things like alfalfa. Alfalfa fields are a common place. You may see them later, and dandelions, things like that.
Good question.
Cool. All right, let's wrap it up with a few final comments from you guys.
So just, I think this is a great project you guys are working on, and I realized for those of you that are doing that project with the big grouse property, I think we've covered a lot of those things that may impact those birds. And so, if anything, hopefully you guys through this deal have gained an appreciation for this very cool species, and hopefully down the road you'll kind of stay up to date on what's going on with this species as we're trying to manage it in the future.
Yeah, I think I'd encourage any of you, if you're ever out somewhere where there is sagebrush, especially this time of year, or interested, maybe talk to FWP biologists. Sometimes they know some areas that, if you're interested, to go out and watch a sage grouse dance. It's something that is a unique experience. Like I said, it's unlike most anything else you'll probably see. They're kind of weird birds, but it's a fun thing to see. Really, really impressive. So I'd encourage you to think about doing that.
And yeah, thank you guys for being involved and letting us live stream from the lek.
And thank you guys for coming to this beautiful part of Montana to see this, and we'll see you soon.